Dead Space 3 is the third installment of a series of survival horror third-person shooters developed by Visceral Games and published by EA. The original Dead Space was actually innovative for its time, being among the first AAA games to completely do away with the concept of a HUD and contain all necessary information within the game world via things like health and status indicators on Isaac's rig, ammunition indicators on weapons, and a personal hologram device for inventory management, which meant no pausing while fiddling with inventory. It also introduced the concept of dismemberment, meaning that rather than depleting health, players had to remove the limbs of enemies in order to defeat them. This literally meant that enemies could eat entire magazines of ammunition if the player is not appropriately aiming for the limbs. The game received universal acclaim for combining these aspects and more to create a unique sense of tension and demand the player's focus from start to finish. The sequel, Dead Space 2, maintained the general feel of the original, while making Isaac's movements a bit less clunky and balancing the weapons and abilities more effectively. While Dead Space 2 wasn't as stringent in terms of the dismemberment rule, players were still heavily penalized for not placing their shots perfectly. This game also marks the point where Isaac shifted away from being a silent protagonist. In addition to the grunts and moans of Dead Space 1, Isaac has tons of well-scripted voice acting all throughout the game.
Isaac! I don't think I can open...
And then we have Dead Space 3. Coming out only 2 years after the second game, as opposed to the 3-year gap between the first two, Dead Space 3 is the first game in the series to feature cooperative play, and the first to have an Origin-exclusive PC release, as well as a weapon crafting system, universal ammunition, Day 1 DLC, etc., etc. Let me say this outright. While Dead Space 3 is a perfectly passable game on its own, it is inherently broken, lazy, and a complete bastardization of the Dead Space franchise as established by the previous two titles. While the majority of flaws in Dead Space 3 are minor, they are all problems that were non-existent in the previous two games, and they all serve to completely strip the game from the same sense of tension and immersion that the previous two games revolved around.
Alright, let me sell some of these med packs, because I have way too fucking many.
Dog, I got so many. Like, I don't even, I just sell my fucking, like, small ones, like, right off the bat, just because I got so many mediums.
The first issue that becomes readily apparent when playing Dead Space 3 is the overabundance of items. Even on impossible difficulty, the only thing that's actually impossible is running out of ammunition or health packs due to the insanely high rate at which they drop. At multiple points, players will find themselves dropping small health packs to pick up medium ones, or selling clips of ammunition, which were invaluable in the previous two games, to free up inventory space. The only game mode that even somewhat remedies this glaring issue is the pure survival mode, which brings me to the next point. Dead Space 3 offers a few unique game modes, such as Classic Mode, which fixes the difficulty to hard, forces the game to be played in single player only, and restricts Isaac to only using weapons in the previous two games, and Pure Survival Mode, which also fixes the difficulty to hard and alters the drop rates so that enemies in boxes only ever drop resources, and never health, ammunition, or stasis packs. Pure Survival Mode forces the player to use the bench to craft ammunition and health, and conserve them until reaching the next bench. In this mode, overusing ammunition means falling behind on weapon upgrades, overusing stasis packs means falling behind on suit upgrades, and health packs are finite, depending on how much somatic gel the player has managed to scavenge. This greatly increases the difficulty in a fair way and improves the overall balance of the game. What's the problem? These modes are locked and unplayable until the game has been beaten at least once already. This is such an antiquated design practice. There's absolutely no reason to play keep away with these modes other than to artificially elongate the game by forcing some players to trudge through the standard campaign before they can play the mode they really wanted. Of course, most players will be so done with the game after the first playthrough that they won't even want to try out the extra modes. There is one caveat to playing on Pure Survival Mode, however. The fact that it emphasizes scavenging for resources also means that the player can't neglect using those.
Hey, I found another fucking scavenger bot. Well, how do you like that?
Okay, the more we get of these, the more pissed off I get.
Like, I thought that we would only get one the whole fucking game.
Same. And the game would be so much more enjoyable if we only got one.
Fucking scavenger bots. As if one isn't bad enough, the player gets 3 of them towards the end of the game. It's such a sigh of relief just to drop the last one on the ground, knowing that I won't have to mouse wheel through it when trying to change weapons for a brief period of time. The only reason these things were put into the game was so that they could serve as a means for in-game microtransactions that increase the effectiveness of the little shits. There's even a $5 unlock to make them talk. Constantly taking the time out to pull out the scavenger bots and search for just the right spot to place them which sometimes end up being behind impassable walls, or in large out-of-the-way alcoves that contain nothing else, then picking them up from each bench over and over breaks up the gameplay so much that ignoring the things can shave hours off the total game time, which would be okay if not for the arbitrarily rare resource tungsten, which is the single most useful resource in the game, and can only be obtained in large quantities by using the scavenger bots effectively. Well, that's not entirely true.
Oh shit. For some reason, we can build every single one of the upgrade circuits right now.
I can't. Hold on, wait. Hold on. Are you sure you loaded the right save file? I can't build all of them.
Really?
Really?
It's just letting me build every damn one of them.
I definitely can't do that shit. That's fucking weird. I can't do that.
Do you know what it is? I went into one-player mode, and I fucking went to the crafting tutorial thing, and then I save and quit out of that, and that just lets me craft everything now.
So did you just glitch the game and now you can craft crazy shit?
I think so.
Holy hell.
Don't feel like grinding around using scavenger bots to farm tungsten? Don't worry, the game is chock full of bugs and exploits that allows unsuspecting players to permanently unlock every item in the game by saving and quitting from the weapon crafting arena, which gets unlocked after discovering the third bench in the game, the first usable one when not playing on pure survival. Players can also keep on farming the same items over and over by collecting them, then saving and reloading. What's better is that EA officially announced that they had no interest in ever patching these bugs. Is it starting to become apparent why I refer to the game as broken? If not, then take a look at Exhibit D.
You see this shotgun? This shotgun is the epitome of everything that is wrong with this game, and the way that you're supposed to play it to enjoy it the most. You're supposed to not try.
Yeah, you're supposed to not try.
You're supposed to give zero fucks.
Yeah, and use shotguns.
Double shotgun. That's all I gotta say.
There is only one truly effective weapon in Dead Space 3, and while the game refers to it as a shotgun, it is more akin to a long-range, double-barreled sniper rifle with knockback. God forbid you got the game within the first few weeks of release, in which case you immediately have access to the Evangelizer shotgun, which is a rapid-fire, long-range, double-barreled sniper rifle with knockback, with roughly 3 less shots per magazine. Players can experiment with the crafting system to their heart's content, but there is no more effective weapon in the game. Why not? Because dismemberment is no longer important in Dead Space 3. The way the game works this time around is that enemies have health, and that the player can simply shoot them until they die. Sure, aiming for the limbs deals extra damage, but since the game exudes ammunition faster than the player can possibly use it, it becomes faster, safer, and more effective to simply pump as much firepower into enemies as fast as possible in order to kill them. The only other factor that is of any importance is knockback, which the shotgun has plenty of, instantly downing the vast majority of enemies with one shot, a feat not even the rocket launcher can accomplish for some inexplicable reason. Making those speedy necromorphs flinch before they can reach you is the key to success. And while we're on the topic of flinching...
Oh man, that's not the fucking Oh damn! That dude almost killed me! Oh shit! He did kill me.
Okay, he did kill you.
What the hell? How'd I fucking die?
Okay.
Isaac and John Carver never flinch. It is entirely possible to have an off-screen necromorph whittle away at Isaac's ankles and deplete all of his health without the player ever noticing. This is part of an effort to make the movement and interaction in Dead Space 3 more fluid and less clunky than the previous two titles. But the problem lies in the fact that the clunkiness of the previous games was by no means poorly designed. Making Isaac stop in his tracks every time he's attacked provides an adequate consequence for engaging necromorphs recklessly. Not only does it momentarily render Isaac powerless, but it also gives the necromorphs time to surround him and, more importantly, it conditions the player into the mindset that getting hit is bad and that it should be avoided at all costs. It's the modern equivalent to the older Resident Evil games, where the goal wasn't to kill zombies, but to avoid getting attacked by them. Dead Space 1 and 2 managed to preserve the spirit of those games without having to resort to the outdated tank control scheme that it was associated with. Unfortunately, while trying to make the game more fluid, Visceral Games inadvertently stripped it of its single most visceral aspect. The end result of all of these issues is a complete lack of the sense of immersion and tension that the previous two games evoked. The game can be played completely absent-mindedly, which is a serious problem that did not exist in the first and second games. What makes it even worse is that they're all issues that could have easily been remedied by paying attention to the success of the previous iterations. But it's quite apparent that the game was lazily hobbled together as a killing cash grab on a successful IP. The fact that the game was lazily designed is apparent in one glaring flaw that becomes more and more apparent the longer one plays the game.
I don't think these lockers were here. I don't remember these lockers being here. But it's the exact same layout. The exact same.
You're right, you're right. I think we've actually been in a room like this, like, multiple times before that, too. Yeah.
Haven't I been here before? This is a question players will ask themselves time and time again all throughout the game, since, with the exception of the first and last couples of chapters, the vast majority of the rooms in Dead Space 3 are literally copied and pasted and reused over and over again, save for a few lockers added or removed here and there. This is also why the game contains such an absurd amount of elevators. All those elevators simply serve as seamless transitions between the same copied and pasted rooms. Doing all of the optional missions makes it especially transparent how blatant the reuse of assets is. While all the other flaws in Dead Space 3 can be shrugged off as honest mistakes, this is irrefutable evidence that Visceral Games were really phoning this one in. For anyone on the fence about purchasing Dead Space 3, if you're looking for a decent cooperative third-person shooter in the same vein as Resident Evil 5, Dead Space 3 is the game for you. If not, give this one a pass. Either way, go back and play the previous two games if you haven't already, as they're both masterpieces in their own respect. I'm Yama, and this has been a Try2 review.